Thanks and welcome back to Oshkosh. It's good to be back after this weird hiatus, but we're here. And welcome to 5 things you must know about Datalink weather. Certainly there's more than just 5 that you need to know about, but I want to cover 5 things that every pilot that flies with Datalink weather should know about. Well, my name is Scott Denstead. You've probably heard me in the past at some point in time. If not, good to see you. I'm a CFI and I'm a former National Weather Service meteorologist. Been working in the meteorology field for over 40 years, last 25 in aviation, specifically aviation weather. And I'm also EA's weather subject matter expert. So how many folks here are EAA members? Excellent. Do me a favor, go out on the EA website, look for the webinars, whether they're live. Been doing lots of those with EA folks. And there's also all of those get recorded, so you can learn more about weather in all different subjects. And I'm also the founder of the newest aviation weather application out there, like you need another application to put on your phone. EZWxBrief, EZWxBrief. All right, so here's today's topics. Here's the 5 things that you really must know about Datalink weather. First of all is the difference between convections and thunderstorms. The word Datalink is not in that, but there's an aspect of learning about weather that you definitely need to understand. We're going to talk about that specifically. Then we're going to move into Datalink lightning. There's some very specific things I want to point out there. And also, probably the hottest topic I seem to get all the time is, what about this whole latency thing of Datalink weather in terms of the radar mosaic? What's that all about? So we're going to cover that and go into the Datalink cloud and ecotops, as well as talk about service coverage. And if you stay to the bitter end, if you have a card that was handed out today, you'll get a free gift courtesy of SiriusXM and my EZWxBrief. But you got to stick around to the very end after all the questions, and I'll divulge what you're getting for your free gift. All right, so number 1 topic, first of all, is convection versus thunderstorms. So what is the most significant weather threat for summertime flying? And I'll give you a hint, it's not thunderstorms. Oh. Well, basically, yes, thunderstorms we know are dangerous. I don't want you to fly under one or fly through one. But in general, it doesn't take a full-blown thunderstorm to ruin your day or your flight. So the key is to minimize your exposure to what I call deep, moist convection. So you've heard run DMC. Well, this is run away from DMC. So deep moist convection is something you don't want to fool around with. So you want to minimize your exposure to not to thunderstorms, but to deep moist convection. I always say that those kind of sounds to a pilot are just music to your ears, but when you're trying to talk over that, it's not very fun. So anyway, most of you have probably seen this particular diagram. This is from the Aviation Weather Advisory Circular 0006B. It's the thunderstorm life cycle that you're taught from kind of the beginning. This has been around for many, many decades in terms of being able to talk about and understand essentially what the thunderstorm is all about. So there's 3 different stages of convective development. One is the towering cumulus stage, where you get the building of convection. The other is a mature stage, where you start getting things like lightning, outflow boundaries, downdrafts, updrafts, precipitation starts to fall. And then finally you get to the dissipating stage, where you have convective debris laying around. So the thing is that a lot of times most pilots are focusing a lot on that middle stage, the mature stage. And what I'm trying to do is basically focus us on the left, very far left, and that's the towering cumulus stage, because that's when we start to first get into some dangerous weather. All right, so many years ago, somebody said, Scott, can you give me a definition of a thunderstorm? And I thought about that, and it occurred to me that I really didn't have a great answer to the question. I could certainly kind of muddle through it, but I found one from the Severe Storm Lab in Norman, Oklahoma, that defines a thunderstorm as a rain shower during which you hear thunder. Pretty simple. A rain shower during which you hear thunder. So we know that all the thunder comes from lightning, so all thunderstorms have lightning, of course. It's actually a pretty darn succinct and important definition that you need to get into your head, because ultimately the key element there is a rain shower. So what do you call something 1 second before the first lightning strike? A rain shower. Can't call it a thunderstorm, but ultimately it's a rain shower. I think the term rain shower to a lot of pilots tends to, oh, it's just going to be a few sprinkles. Well, that's not the way as a pilot we should look at this. So all thunderstorms start out as a rain shower. All thunderstorms start out as a rain shower. But we know that not all thunderstorms grow up to be, or all rain showers grow up to be thunderstorms, unfortunately. Or fortunately, as the case may be. But ultimately, we know that we don't always get a thunderstorm out of every single rain shower. So the rain shower itself is just the beginning of the convective process. That's that towering cumulus phase where we can get precipitation. Out of the bottom of the cloud. That's the beginning of the process, and that's, for most of the aircraft that we fly, folks in here, rain shower is where we first see the first threats. So, I don't know how good this will show up on the screens up there, but would you fly into this supercell thunderstorm here? I'm flying along here, and I'm just going to say, oh, I'm going to make a nice hard right turn right into this supercell thunderstorm. You don't do that because it looks threatening. You can visually see that's not something I want to challenge. It looks really ugly, really bad. And most of us, say 99.99% of us, would not do that unless we really have a death wish, because it looks threatening. Turns out that if you look at all the commercial aviation accidents, none of them have happened due to a supercell thunderstorm. Why? Because the crew sees it and doesn't want to fly in it. Let me make sure okay? So does this look threatening? Lots of blue sky around there. This is obviously taken from the ground, but ultimately, if you were up in the air, this would not look threatening at all. However, this will likely be the thing that kills you. My words to most of my students are, beware the benign. The benign thing is going to kill you because this looks inviting. Hey, the airport's right under that area. Hey, there's a little dark cloud, no problem. I'm going to dip right down in there and land, do my pattern, button up the airplane. Yeah, if the plane gets a little bit wet, that's great because they'll start cleaning some of the bugs off the airplane, no big deal. Let me show you something here. So what do we call that? That's a microburst. Out of a little rain shower. There was no lightning in that thing. You would not survive it, most likely. Let's see here. All right, so the problem is even the smallest rain shower can be problematic when it comes to convection. So that was convection there. So in this particular case, the rain shower doesn't look threatening, but it very much was a bad situation. But it's going to be just as dangerous. So here's an example. You bring up your SiriusXM weather. You're looking at a depiction here, and you have your lightning turned on. Do you see any lightning strikes anywhere in that area? Anywhere on the screen? Not one. Not a single lightning strike there. Maybe your storm scope might be picking up a couple. All those cells that you see all around, even some of those that actually have the storm tracks on them, they're rain showers that could be producing that microburst that we just saw. Microbursts are a lot more common than you might think. And it's not unusual for some of these rain showers to produce significant microbursts. And if you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, you might experience one. But anytime you see the tracks, the storm tracks painted on your NexRad display, that should be a good indication that this is a cell that you need to be careful about. Because the NexRad radar is tracking something that's cellular. That's the only way it can track it, is through some cell algorithms. So ultimately, these rain showers are threatening, and we should go around them. We should not go under them. So it's important to understand that a forecast for showers is a forecast for convection. So if you see in the terminal forecasts, or if you're a local weather forecaster, when your TV starts to talk about showers, or you bring up your 7-day or 10-day forecast and they're talking about showers, that's a forecast for convection. So things like VCSH for showers in the vicinity, SHRA for showers in the terminal area, all are a forecast for convection. Notice there's no CBs for cumulonimbus in the cloud group, because technically it's not a thunderstorm. So my recommendation is that the terminal forecast itself is a great forecast, but you need to make sure that you're looking beyond the terminal forecasts. So sometimes when the forecasters have not very much in the way of confidence, because we know that not all weather systems produce a very significant signature in the forecast world. So when forecasters don't have a lot of confidence about thunderstorms, and the other aspect of that too is that forecasters in general, National Weather Service is kind of pressured by the airlines not to put thunderstorms in the forecast if they don't think that's going to happen. So they'll put in things like showers in the vicinity or rain showers. And so I recommend folks to read the forecast discussions, because they're written by the same forecasters that issue the TAFs. And as you'll see in this case, scattered showers and perhaps a thunderstorm are expected across the North Carolina Piedmont from the afternoon until early evening, and we'll carry VCSH for now to cover that threat. That's a way of telling pilots, oh, by the way, this is a convective process. That may change over to a TSRA in the near future. All right, so let's move into talking about number 2, Datalink lightning. So lightning in of itself does not indicate storm severity. The presence of lightning suggests that there are very cold cloud tops, and we know when they're cold cloud tops, that means typically we've got some pretty significant updrafts, and therefore a well-developed convective situation. So I'm not saying that you should ignore lightning. Certainly lightning is a good signpost for a bad situation, but you don't have to have lightning to ruin your day. So when you have this kind of situation, lightning generally tells you you have a very significant vertical mixing in the atmosphere, and that causes the severe or extreme turbulence you're about to find out about if you happen to fly into one or even under one. So in that case also, it's also indicative of convective low-level wind shear. Lightning comes in two different flavors, chocolate and vanilla. Cloud to ground and intracloud. If everyone was around here on Wednesday with that storm and had a chance to look outside around 11 o'clock or so, or midnight, you noticed that there were a lot of intracloud lightning strikes. Well, it turns out that depending on where you're located in the country, there's actually a ratio of intracloud lightning to cloud to ground. So if you're in Florida or in most of the eastern half of the US, Midwest, Ohio, Tennessee valleys, that area, even down into Florida, most of the time you're going to have a 2-to-1 or 1-to-1 ratio between intracloud and cloud to ground lightning strikes. But if you're out in the plains area, northern, southern, and central plains, or in the far west, it's a 10-to-1 ratio, 10 intracloud strikes to 1 cloud to ground strike. So it's dominant. And again, in fact, this particular cell that went through on Wednesday night into Thursday, early Thursday morning, was dominated by intracloud lightning strikes. In fact, when you get to a point, and we were able to easily recognize that just happened, is that in some cases, you get really high flash rates. Those are typically dominated by intracloud lightning. And again, often more than a 10-to-1 ratio, and it can be infinite in some very severe storms. And for a while, I could tell that most of the lightning strikes that were occurring with this mesoscale convective system went through were, in fact, most of them were, in fact, intracloud lightning strikes. So I believe it's important to be able to understand and see both. The problem is when you go to ADS-B, that particular system only tells you about cloud to ground strikes, not intracloud lightning. And many of these cells that develop as rain showers and develop into thunderstorms, most of the initial lightning strikes are actually intracloud strikes. So you want to be sure that you're looking at a complete picture. With FISB, unfortunately, you don't get that. So again, in a developing storm, intracloud often dominates the cell. Turns out that SiriusXM does provide the case where you see both intracloud and cloud to ground lightning strikes. So you get the best of both worlds with that. You're not missing anything. So if you're flying along and you find out that you are in a situation where you're seeing a developing cell, and you may see something on your storm scope, but you're not seeing something on your FISB, most likely that's the case of an intracloud lightning strike. Okay? All right, so the topic I normally talk about, I've probably went through this about a dozen times in my booth back in Hangar C. You know, how old is the Datalink radar mosaic that you're staring at? So both FISB and SiriusXM broadcast a mosaic that is not real time. I will certainly say that it's not a real-time picture. If you have onboard radar, that's real time. If you're talking to an approach controller in a busy airspace, most likely they'll have their weather, if there's any weather in the area, they'll be able to see that on their ASR 9 or ASR 11 as a dual fan beam Doppler weather radar in addition to tracking aircraft. That's pretty up to date as well, usually less than a minute. They can certainly help you out, but that's not going to be the case with the broadcast you receive in the cockpit. There is a delay. So it's really a glimpse of the recent past. So back in June 2012, about 10 years after we started seeing some of these products coming out, FAA is always seemingly 10 years behind everything else, or the government's always 10 years behind everything. They issued a report, just 3-page safety alert, and was later revised in December of of 2015 that kind of discussed this latency. They started realizing that, man, they need to actually get some information out to pilots to tell them that this is not a good thing. But they did something that I didn't necessarily agree with. They kind of made it obvious that this display could be 15 to 20 minutes old. And the answer to that is yes, it could be 15 to 20 minutes old, but that's very much the exception, and they do talk about that here, the exception rather than the rule. So I think if you're thinking that the display is 15 to 20 minutes old, is just as bad as telling somebody it's real time, because that's really not what you're seeing outside the window in terms of comparison. If you miss some updates, certainly missing updates is going to put you behind. But if you're getting updates regularly, and you know that by looking at your display, what comes across in terms of what is received, certainly 15 to 20 minutes is not correct. But there is really no way to know the exact age of what you're seeing. And it's not the fault of SiriusXM per se, or not the fault of the National Weather Service or the FAA. It's just the nature of the beast of how the data that we get is provided. Now you see here, this is a Garmin Pilot, and you see on the right side, this gives you the age of all the different products coming in. Basically, this is essentially when that particular data was updated on your display, when it was received. And there's lots going on under the hood here that we can talk about. So that age that you're showing there doesn't mean that that's how old the radar is compared to what you see outside the cockpit. That's basically a line in the sand of basically when the data was kind of received in the cockpit at this point. So we know that in real world, it's always going to be older than this age. So the data that you're seeing is going to be older than what you see here in terms of what's outside the cockpit. So at the highest level, it kind of takes, let's look at the concept here. The sensor itself, the NEXRAD radars, need to scan the atmosphere. And if you were sitting at the National Weather Service Weather Forecast Office, you would be able to see those scans in real time. And it takes a while to build that composite image, composite reflectivity, which means it looks at all the elevations of that radar. So it takes 5 minutes or so, and then that data is then broadcast and received in the cockpit. Then it takes some time to render that data once it's received. The problem is, in some cases, all the bits and bytes all come in at once. Sometimes they come in staggered, so the vendor that's displaying that, that's receiving that, has got to take some time to put that together, put it on your display. And then you get to stare at that image for another 2 or 2.5 minutes. The FSB delay, or the time that you're staring at that image before the next update, is 2 minutes, and 2.5 minutes for SiriusXM. So there's a 2-minute window there where you're staring at it. It's not going to change and not going to be updated. So when you start adding all this together, then you're in the area of these 4 latency points. First of all, it takes a while for the volume scan of the radar. The radar's got to go through an entire volume scan looking at all the elevations. And that's about a 5-minute situation. Then it takes time to composite that. Software is run to composite it, to filter it out, and then ship it to SiriusXM, or in case Harris, somewhere around 20 seconds or so. And then it takes time to uplink that. Remember, these are all scheduled because there's bandwidth challenges, so all this data has to be scheduled at specific times. And then at time it takes to render on your display. That's the general situation with Datalink latency. Then the greatest delay is kind of in the volume scan of those radars themselves. So think about the fact that you could look at any pixel here, pick out any pixel. One of those pixels may be almost a little bit over a minute old. because essentially as that volume scan through the radar comes through, it may be that when they go to composite it, it was on this elevation angle, and that's the pixel it picked, and that was the latest one. And so as a result of that, you also may have one that's 5 minutes old and another one that's 3 minutes. So a composite gives you all the different elevation scans, and they're all taken at different times. So that's all put together. So once again, you do not know, when you look at a scan, what each pixel and what elevation scan and how old it is per se. So you can make the assumption it's at least 5 minutes old, if not a little bit more. Or you can kind of average it out and say it's anywhere from 3.5 minutes to 7 minutes old once it goes through this process and is shipped to your receiver. So again, it's not real time. It's a bit delayed, but it's extremely useful. So I look at it as I'm looking out the window and I'm looking essentially at my depiction in the cockpit, and I generally feel that when it gets updated, I'm looking at somewhere between 5 and 7 minutes old from reality. And then again, I stare at that for another 2 minutes. So again, we're looking at maybe 7 to 10 minute kind of range in that case. But certainly not on a regular basis is it going to be 15, 20, 25 minutes old. If you miss an update, you better notice that, because the age of that product will go up. Then you can start to plan on the fact that it might be 15 to 20 minutes old. All right, let's go into Datalink Cloud and EchoTops here. So generally speaking, one of the questions I get a lot is, Scott, how do you determine the tops of clouds? And it's kind of like the holy grail of aviation weather information. So obviously, it's, I understand, especially instrument pilots, they want to be able to fly on top of all this stuff out there, so you want to try to find out where the tops are. And there are generally two different kinds of tops. One is EchoTops. SiriusXM is the only one that provides out of the two, and then there's a CloudTops product. So EchoTops are generally generated by essentially getting the information from the NextRad WSR 88D NextRad Doppler radars. And essentially what they're looking for here is the top of the precipitation core. Every thunderstorm or every convective element has essentially a precipitation core in it. Where is the top of that core? Well, basically they're looking for the 18 dBz level, the highest point where that occurs. That would be the EchoTop. And you can kind of see I've kind of loosely, for this particular cell, which is a cross section, I kind of loosely outlined where that top of that core will be. It's the height that's shown in there. I've shown it's 56,000 feet for the height of that EchoTop cell itself. But in general, the EchoTops are used to determine the vertical extent of convective precipitation. We know the higher that EchoTop is, the more serious the storm is, and therefore the larger or the more distance we should give to that particular cell. But it's not used to really determine the top of a stratus deck, because if it's not producing precipitation, it's not going to produce anything that we can grab along and say, yes, this stratus deck is we're going to pop out at 5,000 feet. It's only used really for convective cloud tops from that standpoint. So SiriusXM does have, this is showing under Garmin Pilot, SiriusXM has EchoTops, and you can add lightning to it, so you can really see where the tops of those cells are. So I would, even if there wasn't any lightning showing, but if I saw there were EchoTops at 30,000 or 35,000 feet, that's a cell that I definitely want to avoid. And again, don't forget about the storm cell attributes. If your particular vendor here allows you to turn those on or off, have those on all the time, because ultimately, anytime you see those arrows that point essentially where that cell is going to be in 20, 40, 60 minutes, that's a good indication that the radars are tracking a cellular situation. Again, there may not be any lightning in it, but we know that It's still a convective situation here. That should get our attention. And in that, they also show you the maximum top one there, maybe 250, 300. Again, that's a good indication. Once you start getting over about 25,000 feet, that's a cell that you definitely want to go around and not go under, and you also want to keep your distance from it. So again, it really helps you avoid the truly ugly stuff out there. And cloud tops are generally the altitude of the top of the highest layer of clouds. And so SiriusXM and FISB broadcast cloud tops with one major difference. So SiriusXM uses the actual cloud tops based on satellite imagery. So what you're seeing is based on observational data. Give me observations any day. Forecasts are great and they're necessary, but if you have an observational product, that's what I want to see. Where FISB broadcasts a 1 or 2 hour forecast based on the high resolution rapid refresh model or the HER model, and it's not based on actual cloud tops. So it's a forecast. Now I've often seen situations like you see here. So on the right is actual NexRad, and this on the left is a 1 hour forecast from the high resolution rapid refresh, which is normally a pretty darn good model, but it totally missed where the convection was going to be developing. And as a result of that, I can guarantee you the cloud top information you would have gotten from FISB at that point would have been way off. So again, the forecast cloud tops from SiriusXM or forecast cloud tops from FISB are just that, they're a forecast. They may be right a fair amount of time, but as you can see here, they're probably going to be wrong some of the time, whereas SiriusXM will never be wrong. It's a little delay, obviously, in the sense they're not going to give you a, like NexRad, one every couple minutes, but what's out there, what's showing, is essentially going to be based on actual information. All right, last but not least, let's talk about service coverage. Essentially two categories that you have to deal with, and that is the reception of the broadcast and limitations for ADS-B and SiriusXM. You can see in the case of ADS-B coverage where you can get access to a signal. If you go way up into Canada or you're down into the Caribbean, you're going to start to lose coverage in those areas with ADS-B. SiriusXM gives you a little bit more wider coverage up into Canada overall, and also down into Mexico and a little part of the Caribbean. And there's also data coverage issues as well. So FISB is always subject to a line of sight. So if you've ever gone to an airport, you might see one of these kind of red and white striped towers. That's likely a tower for FISB at your airport. You know, congratulations, you actually have a tower of FISB on the field. And so you'll see these at some airports. I'm out of Rock Hill, South Carolina, where I do most of my flying out of. There's actually a tower at my home airport. And so airports without an ADS-B tower on the field, you're not going to get information until you get at least up to traffic pattern altitude, or sometimes higher, depending on where you are in the country. But SiriusXM, once you have visibility to the sky, once you pull your airplane out of your hangar and you have visibility to the sky, you can collect all the weather data. So you have a complete picture before you depart. And yes, you can get with FISB, you can get it on your iPhone or your iPad through the internet, through cell service and such. But then you have to transition that to your other display, and that can be complex if there's any kind of significant weather around. With SiriusXM, you have it all laid out in front of you. Your plan is in place. You don't have to be swapping between things. So as soon as you pull your plane out, you'll start receiving the broadcast. I think one of the most significant difference is the service coverage overall. With FISB, there's a look-ahead issue with respect to the products themselves, where SiriusXM, for the most part, provides coast-to-coast information across the board. When you're flying in a fairly fast airplane, that can make somewhat of a difference. A slower airplane, maybe not so much so. But then you get some, like with the CONUS radar with FISB, you see here on the very far right, shown here on ForeFlight, it's very blocky. It's really hard to understand what's going on in the area. And yes, around your particular airplane itself, it's pretty high resolution stuff. It's lower resolutions transmit every 15 minutes, so it is very latent. And it's subject to a look-ahead distance of 200 and 250 miles. The regional reflectivity, again, is a higher depiction of resolution of the radar, and it's transmitted every 2 minutes. And it's also subject to that look-ahead distance. You're not going to see anything beyond about that 250-mile range, depending on what receiver you're doing. But you look at other products here, what you'll notice is that you really can't see. If I'm making this particular flight, I can only see kind of what I see around me here. You really can't see what's happening at my destination, per se. Whereas SiriusXM gives you that high-resolution composite imagery. So here's the FISB image, and then the SiriusXM display. You can actually start to see more about what's out there. And it's transmitted every 2.5 minutes. And again, you get the same resolution coast to coast. So when you're kind of looking at, what to do well in advance, I always tell folks that what you're trying to do in many cases is that if you're making deviations of 40, 50, 60, 70 degrees, you're too close and you're making decisions too late. You should be making changes in your heading based on weather and making 10, 20 degrees at most. Then you're doing the right thing. Okay. Let me go back. All right, so cloud top's the same kind of a thing. When you look at this, you're really not getting a whole lot of information in FISB with cloud top information because you're subject to that look-ahead distance. It's not going to give you information about what's happening at your destination. And same with icing and turbulence. Whereas FISB is going to provide a lot more. It may not be the highest resolution product, but it's going to give you information about what's happening everywhere along your route of flight. So you'll be able to make decisions much better based on that kind of cloud top information. And again, it's a seamless thing coast to coast. All right, so one last point. We'll take a few questions, and we'll finish up. Certainly you see in this particular case, if anybody's done any webinars I've done in the past, you have seen this one, but there's a pretty nasty accident here. Looks like a pickup truck ended up going over the guardrail, and that person evidently is having a bad day there in the pickup truck. But details, whoops, oh dude, that wasn't good. What the heck happened there? Let's see here. Let's try this again. There we go. So if you're really looking at the big picture, and that's really important, you can see here that they escaped some really nasty situation there. Okay? All right, so anyway, we'll take a few questions, but come visit me in Hangar C, the EZWxBrief, on the outside of the Hangar C, booth 3002. We're doing a 14-day trial, and there's also a show special for my new application, or visit SiriusXM in tent 371. So we'll take a few questions. Let's see, we got about 6 minutes. We'll do like 4 minutes of questions, and I can show you at the end what your free gift is for attending. Behind the thunderstorm? Well, so thunderstorms, depending, like pulse thunderstorms, which are your air mass thunderstorms you may hear, may actually not move hardly at all. In fact, a lot of times, those air mass kind of thunderstorms, you have an updraft, and the rain, it basically rains itself out through its own updraft. The rain becomes so heavy. So they don't move a whole lot. With thunderstorms along a particular, like a frontal system or something like that, can obviously travel somewhere between 40, 50, 60 knots in the most severe cases, such as that. And your other question, the first question was? Backside. Oh, backside. Okay, so mostly what I do is anytime there's a cell moving along, I'm trying to go around the backside of that cell. Because typically after a thunderstorm moves through, as long as there's no buildups behind that, usually you start to get to some stable air, so that's usually accepted away. In fact, a lot of times if I know I've got to get point A to point B, and I know that cell is moving through, and I'm about 20 minutes out, I kind of flight plan right for that storm itself. By the time I get to that point, the cell has moved plenty of distance out of the way. And I'm doing this all visually. My rules of thumb are generally keep blue sky above me. If I can do that, I'm not flying under anything and not flying through anything.